The Star Wars galaxy is a vast expanse with exotic planets of every climate and terrain, and a sprawl of systems ripe for exploration and storytelling. One of the least interesting of these planets is Tatooine, an arid and largely featureless expanse of desert, the perfect setting for the beginning of a saga, a landscape a young hero would dream of leaving behind, a horizon to be gazed beyond. If you had a fondness for the sparsely inhabited circumbinary desert planet located in the galaxy's outer rim territories, you were able to revisit it in Return of the Jedi. If your appetite still wasn't sated for sand dunes, dilapidated infrastructure, and hives of scum and villainy, then you could revisit it again in The Phantom Menace, and then, shortly after, appreciate it as a picturesque and nostalgic backdrop for Anakin Skywalker's indiscriminate villainy. If your fixation with Tatooine's empty landscapes, dotted here and there with moisture farms, still needed satisfying, then The Force Awakens brought you to a planet called Jakku, which was 99% Tatooine. If there was still a gap in your life and lack of fulfillment that could only be answered by an increased dosage of binary sunsets and hostile windswept terrain, then The Rise of Skywalker featured a desert landscape or two that might as well have been Tatooine, before Rey visited Luke's abandoned homestead on the actual Tatooine, and the most devoted Tatooinis could watch as she buried Luke and Leia's lightsabers in the sand. But if your cravings to consume more visuals of this largely overlooked galactic backwater were still unsatisfied, then you and equally avid Tatooinists were invited to revel in your fanaticism for this desert planet in The Mandalorian. And if there were still purists who craved immersion in their favorite on-screen world, then such besotted Tatooine fiends could get their fix watching the Book of Boba Fett. And now, for the Tatooine completist, there is the surely overdue return to the one planet in the galaxy it seems impossible to escape, in the new show Obi Wan Kenobi. Disney Plus has found a few intervening years in the cycle of the original trilogy that hasn't yet had content squirted and smeared like silly putty into the cracks. The trailer opens with the kind of still, wide shots of desert porn that Tatooine heads have been pining for. And then we get precious insights into the most sacred Star Wars lore, how Obi-Wan gradually set up a domestic cave house in the middle of nowhere. We then get a spy cam view of Luke as a boy, a scene that vies for viewer disinterest with Picard Season 2's depiction of a young Jean-Luc, but nonetheless has a bit of charm and pathos to it that might coax a faint glow of embers in the cold hearts of wary Star Wars fans. Then, through a streak of J.J. Abrams-esque lens flares, we get new bad guy, apparently called the Inquisitor, who is basically a tiresome, unscary composite of the Borg, this bad guy from Buck Rogers, this bad guy from Doctor Who, the DC's Anti-Monitor, and a bit of Hellraiser thrown in. We then have a conference room with nightclub atmospheric lighting that looks aesthetically out of sync with the universe of the original trilogy. Then some kind of Empire/Dark Side warrior with no distinguishing characteristics or cool armor or other interesting visual elements to speak of. Then we have the introduction of a female Imperial officer, interposed into a world where all officers of the Empire, at this time, in each of the films, was entirely male, in a broad analogy of the Nazi officer class, so that, instead of showcasing diversity and inclusivity in smart and sophisticated ways, the show jarringly bends the conventions out of shape in a way that sticks out. The helicopter lightsaber lunacy of General Grievous is briefly evoked by the twirling talents of Borg bad guy from Buck Rogers bad guy from Doctor Who Anti-Monitor Hellraiser guy, which is then succeeded by an image of what looks like the same guy, though now he looks a little more like Philip the Good. Then the urban landscape opens up, which is more or less copy and pasted from Blade Runner. After some more action scenes, we get a bit of something evocative of Blade, the release of a flock of birds, and then we're out. For all my misgivings, it's likely I'll give this show a go. The reason is, in contrast to the burly and too old Temuera Morrison as Boba Fett, and the 80-something Patrick Stewart as a frail Picard, I really like Ewan McGregor. And he's still relatively young and lively, has great on-screen charisma, and seems the prime age to be returning as Obi-Wan. I'm keen to see him again, because his performance in the 90s and early 2000s saga was so heavily constrained by poor script writing, dreadful dialogue, campy antics, and wretched direction, against backdrops of woeful CGI, that we never really got to see what he was capable of. This series could very well present his Obi-Wan at its most ideal, backed up by modern Disney production budgets, a depiction that could be closer in gravitas to the great Sir Alec Guinness. And who knows, carried on Ewan McGregor's shoulders, the show itself might, despite its inevitable flaws, be at least passably enjoyable.